Hello, friends! Welcome back to another episode of Getting Bookish. And again, I just have to say it, our favorite episode, which is where we talk about all the wonderful books that we have read for this past month in December. Before we get into that, I just want to take a moment to ask if you are loving our episodes, whether you listen to them on podcasts or you watch us on YouTube, if you could subscribe, leave us a comment. That really helps us to get seen and heard by other bookish friends, and we would greatly appreciate that if you would be able to help us out with that. Now, let's get to another little piece of business. We were supposed to give you guys a full podcast of our thoughts on Outlander. That was supposed to be our first podcast of December. And we did record that podcast, but I am so sorry. Something happened. It deleted. I don't know what happened. I have never lost an episode ever. And so I was really bummed.
The computer ate it. We're totally blaming the computer.
It totally did. And I'm so sorry because we just, and then it kind of got to the point where we're like, you know what? I don't want to do it again. It's like we talked for like an hour and yeah, it just disappeared. So we're just going to kind of give you a quick synopsis of what we said. Because I think that's all that it really needs. Liz and I decided to co-read Outlander, and we asked you guys to come along and do that with us. It wasn't anything that we were trying to be too specific about. It was like, we're going to read this book. We're both kind of interested in it. We've seen the show. And so we started reading it. We had the best intention to read this full giant book, but it didn't quite turn out how we thought it would. Liz.
So
what were your thoughts?
We'd like to title this part of the podcast Outlander, an unpopular opinion. Like Shawna said, we really did intend to read it and like it because I've only seen the first season. Shawna, I think, has seen the whole
all of it.
show up to this point. Yeah. And I liked the show and Shawna likes the show, and I was like, oh, this will be fun. This isn't my normal genre. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I DNF'd Outlander right here. There's
halfway through.
Yeah. So I can even tell you, I was on page 307, which that was a lot of pages to have read already. Mm-hmm. And for me, historical romance isn't my genre. And this book focuses a lot on like place and period description. And I was so incredibly bored. So I DNF'd. And my rule is if I DNF a book, that's a 1 star. So DNF, 1 star. I felt really bad about it for a little bit because I know a lot of you guys, our listeners, love this book. But I didn't. Sorry, friends.
Yeah, and, Liz said that this is not her genre, but it is mine. I love historical fiction. I love historical romance. I love time travel. I love Scotland. I love plot. I like details. I love description of periods. But this one, for some reason, I don't know what it was. I mean, like Liz can tell you, I've been conflicted about this book, like painfully so. I wanted to love it so much, and I just kept trying to, charge ahead and keep reading. I even switched to audiobook so I could just listen passively, and I couldn't do it anymore. And I think, from Liz and I talking, we couldn't connect with Claire, and that's the main voice of the book. And that, I think, was one of the biggest problems. We couldn't connect with her. It felt like she didn't seem real to us because she seemed like they were trying to show that she was so flawless. And I know that's a flaw, but it just didn't seem real,
Yeah.
So
yeah. You DNF'd it as well,
DNF'd
right?
it about halfway through, about where Liz was. Probably I think she got a little bit farther than I did. But yeah, I DNF'd it, sadly. I was going to go and just finish it, but I'm like, this is a hefty book to finish. And then after we decided to do that, which was like mid-November maybe, or a little bit earlier than that. I went into like a bookish depression because I was so upset about not following through on finishing this book, mostly because we shared it with everybody and we're like, hey, we're going to do this. And then I felt bad because I'm like, and now we're not, you know? But I do know that, like you had said before, there are so many of our listeners that love this book. And I feel like some people got it because they were going to read along and it turned out to be a book that they absolutely love. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think it all comes back to the moral of the story. There are books for everyone. That's why there are so many genres and just so many types of books to read, is that different people are going to like different things. And that is super. And I need to remind myself, and Shawna, I will remind you, that we don't have to like it, even though we really think we're going to, and we think it's going to be great and amazing and wonderful. It's okay if we don't like a book. And so it's okay for you guys too. Like if we're like, oh my goodness, this is my favorite book ever. And you read it and you're like, we're not reading the same book. It's because we're not reading the same book, because you bring your own experiences. Right. So I will still talk to people and I will smile while they tell me that Outlander is the most amazing book they've ever read ever. And I'll be like, that's awesome. And I will just keep my somewhat negative experience to myself.
You know, I would still recommend it to somebody if maybe they haven't seen the show, because I think that was one of my biggest problems, is that I saw the show, then I tried to read the book, and for me, I couldn't separate the two, and so I had all the visions of what was already going on in the show in my mind, and that was just really hard for me to do. So I think that was one of my biggest problems. But, you know, we gave it a shot, and we'll try another book. We have some fun stuff coming up in our next episode about our challenges that we're going to do for 2020. And I think there's some other books that we're going to give a shot. So we'll try it again. We'll find one that we have fun reading together.
It's a bookish journey.
It is. All right. Now, as far as our books for this month that we did read, or maybe still DNF'd, Liz, do you want to go first with your list?
What? DNF'd more books? Yeah, that happened this month. So I had a fun variety of books this month. I think like there's a lot of star variety. Like I had 1-star books and I had 5-star books. So it's kind of all over the place. And I had a pretty good reading month, which is exciting. So the first book I read is Scythe by Neal Shusterman. And I think I'm coming to the realization that Shusterman is not my author. He's very well known. He writes YA books that are very well known. And every time I read them, I'm always like, this was a really good idea. But I didn't like the way the story was delivered. His books are very plot-based, which we've already established. That's not my favorite kind of book to read. It's interesting. It takes place in this like future utopian society where death is obsolete. No one dies. And so they had to, so that the world doesn't become overpopulated, they had to elect these people that will go and be like, oh, well, you know, it's very possible you could have just gotten in a car accident right now and died, statistically speaking. So we're just going to kill you. And it's done in this very like mathematical way. Like it's not like, oh, I don't like you, so I've decided to, you know, take your life away. But the book, people rave about this series. I gave it 3 stars. It was okay. It was not my favorite thing that I've read. I'm not going to read any more in the series. The second book I read, on the other hand, was a reread. Shocking.
So pretty. Oh, Erin Morgenstern. That's the Night Circus.
Yes, Erin Morgenstern wrote The Night Circus, and that was about 7 years ago. Wow. And so this is her next book. She's only written the 2 and The Starless Sea.
Please
look at all my sticky notes in there. This was one of my favorite books I've read.
Yay!
Maybe ever.
Yay! I'm excited.
It was so good. 5 stars for sure. I'm not going to say anything it's about because I can't figure out a way to describe it without it feeling like a spoiler. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say it was 5 stars. She is an artist. Like she paints and things, but she's an like she brings that to the book because she creates these gorgeous like scenes in your mind. And so The Starless Sea, I really can't recommend it more, especially if you liked The Night Circus. If you like her style of writing, like you're really in for a treat.
You know, it's funny that you say it's really hard for you to kind of describe that book because without giving something away. That's what I feel like as I'm reading Night Circus. That's how I feel about that when somebody says, well, what's it about? I'm like, I can't really tell you because
I'm always like,
she has a way of putting so much in there that it's like, what do I tell you about it? There's so much. Right. And I don't want to give anything
what
away.
What it's about, and then there's what it's about. Yeah. And it's they're so different.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah. Yes. So good.
Why didn't we pick that book? Like,
what?
Why didn't we pick that book?
I know. I'll reread it.
Here, how about we do this? I know this is probably going to be, I don't know, it could take another 7 years. When her third book comes out, we'll read it together.
There you go. Okay. So the next book I read is Ruin and Rising. That's the third book in Leigh Bardugo's Grisha trilogy. So those were all a reread for me, and I read that one. That one didn't hold up to my original star rating. I had given it a 5-star rating, and this time I gave it a 4-star rating. If I was being really honest, it's maybe only a 3.5-star rating, but mostly just because I really hate the way it ends. So I'll leave that there. If you guys have read it, send us a message and I will be happy to talk to you about it because I really don't like the way it ends. So the next book on my list is The Hazelwood. It's by Melissa Albert. That was a reread for me because the next book in the series comes out at the beginning of January. And it's kind of a dark, modern fairy tale. It's YA fantasy. It's really, really fun. I highly recommend it. And the second book, I don't remember the title, but it does come out on January 7th, I believe. And it's very exciting. I can't wait to see what happens to Alice next. So The Hazelwood is super good. Then I read kind of a off topic, sort of, not a fiction book, but Reading People by Anne Bogle. Mm-hmm. And that book it's really a fun, introduction to lots of different personality type tests. So it's about Anne Bogle's journey on kind of how she, discovered who she was. That's not exactly what was happening, but she wanted to have that label for herself. And so she did lots of different personality testing over almost her entire life. And so she writes about that in this book. And that part of it was really interesting. And then she gives a lot of information that's an overview of each of those personality tests and why you would use them in your life. And I think for people who are maybe well, what's this Enneagram thing everybody's talking about? Or I don't even know what my Myers-Briggs is. This book is a great place to start. But for me, who kind of already has a lot of working knowledge about that, I found it a little too much of an overview and it didn't really go into depth in anything. So I gave it 3 stars. It was a good book. I would definitely recommend it to people who are interested in learning more about personality tests and all the different ones that are out there and why you would even want to take them. But like I said, I didn't necessarily learn a lot of things, but it was interesting to learn more about Anne Bogle. So the next thing I read was a DNF. I know. That's a big book too. This is Storm and Fury. It's huge. I did not get very far into it. This is Storm and Fury by Jennifer L. Armentrout. It was one of my Book of the Month picks. Oh. And I like Jennifer L. Armentrout. I've read other books by her. It's YA fantasy, which is my genre of choice. In the very first 2 pages, the main character is on this pseudo date with this boy, and they start kissing and he tries to push her to do more and she doesn't want to, and then he tries to force her to do more, and that happens in the first 2 pages of the book. And I couldn't get over it. I'm
you're having PTSD
why?
From Damsel.
Right, exactly. that is such an unnecessary way to start a book. Like, and like, it doesn't even have any bearing. So I got about 4 chapters in, and it doesn't even have any bearings on how the storyline moves forward.
Oh.
Like, it was such a terrible way to start the book.
Like they wanted to start the book with like a shocker scene.
Right. And I was shocked and I couldn't read anymore. So I'm hoping, I mean, I own the book. So I'm hoping that maybe at some point I decide to go back and be like, I'm just going to like skip the first couple chapters and just jump in from there and maybe it'll be better. But for now, it's a DNF, 1 star. Okay. So after that one, I listened to If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. And I don't even know how this ended up on my TBR, but it was on my TBR. I requested it from the library. I got the audio and I'm listening to it and I'm like, why did I want to read this book? So it's like a mystery thriller, which is not a genre I read. Mm-hmm. But it's set at this college where these kids, they're not just theater students, they're specifically Shakespeare students. So, like, Shakespeare is already kind of dark and dramatic, and it has all these things going on, and then, like, someone dies in real life. Well, real life in the book. And so it, like, makes it even more layered and complicated, and it was really good. Like, I listened to the whole thing in, like, a day and a half, and I was like, oh. Like, I understand why people want to read these kinds of books. So that was definitely a 4-star recommendation, even if you don't like thrillers, even if maybe it was just like the idea of Shakespeare that made me add it. I don't know. It's a mystery of why it was added to my TBR, and it is a mystery. So it was good. I enjoyed it. 4 stars. Highly recommend. All right. Next book I read was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving.
Ooh.
And I know, creepy books back to back. I'm not sure I've ever read it before.
I haven't. I've seen the movie and it creeped me out.
I've seen the movie. I've seen a couple of different versions of it. I've always been like interested in it. I have leggings with headless horsemen on them. But the book is not nearly as creepy and cool as the movie is.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, that was it. So I gave it 3 stars and I was like, the movie's better. I don't know what to say, which is terrible. I hate saying that, but it's the truth.
It's because it was Johnny Depp.
Right. Probably. All the stars for Johnny Depp. All right. So my next book, I DNF'd. Oh, no. It was The Raven Tower. And here's the problem. That book is told in second person. So that uses the you voice.
Oh.
And not only is that extremely uncomfortable, but the main character who you are embodying, I guess, as the reader, is a god that's a rock.
Okay.
Yep. So I DNF'd that one. I just couldn't. I'm like, what am I supposed to be connecting to here? Like, it wasn't like this origin story, how the rock was just there and like it sees the other gods and the other gods are much more mobile than it is.
Well,
and I'm just like,
you're a rock.
Why am I supposed to like this? And it was interesting because the other reviews I read were very similar in, how am I supposed to connect to this character? Like, not only is it a very unusual character, but it's also told in second person. So it was weird. It was a choice. That was a choice. So anyway, DNF, 1 star, don't recommend. I read the next book in Holly Black's series. Last month I read The Cruel Prince, and so this month I read The Wicked King. And last month I talked about how I didn't think I liked Holly Black, but this series I'm very much enjoying. It's kind of a slow burn romance. It takes place in a fairy kingdom. It's just good. It's not like it's great literature, but it's definitely been a really fun read. So the 3rd book just came out, and I asked for it for Christmas, so fingers crossed. Then I listened to, I had a lot of books this month. Now that I'm looking at my list, I'm like, wow. I listened to Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman.
Okay.
And that's kind of fun. So Gaiman always brings like kind of a fairy tale essence to his books.
Was it creepy?
Um, a little bit, but it's told from the point of view of a 7-year-old boy.
Okay.
And so it's creepy to him who's a 7-year-old boy. Like there's things that are scary to him, but as an adult, as he's telling them, like you're just more practical minded. So I feel like in my mind, I'm like soothing the main character, like, oh, it's okay. It's probably not quite that bad, that kind of thing. But it was really engaging. I read it super fast. And it's also short. I think I forget sometimes that adult fiction is not YA fantasy. Right. That's like 600 pages. It's like a 350-page book. And so I listened to it and I was like, it's over already? What happened? But it was really good. I gave that 5 stars. My next book, I couldn't DNF another book because I had already DNF'd 2. That was just a rule I had decided to apply to myself, was this, Cursed. It's written by Thomas Wheeler, and it's illustrated by Frank Miller. And I read the whole thing. I gave it 2 stars. That's potentially generous. It's terrible for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is because the whole thing turns out it's just a marketing ploy for the television show that's coming out on Netflix next year.
Oh, that's the one you were telling me about.
Yeah. So after I finished it, I was like, I have to figure out what's wrong with this book. Like, I just couldn't figure it out. And so I go online and I'm reading about it. And it turns out that these 2 people wrote a screenplay of this story. They pitched it to Netflix, and Netflix is like, you know what people really like? Books. A book first. And so they actually referred to it in this article I was reading as like a media project and not a book. Like it was the whole thing was very odd, but that's exactly what this reads like. It reads like a screenplay. Like there's dialogue and there's setting, but there's no character development. There's like, it's pure plot. And it actually reads a lot like Outlander does.
Oh no. Which
will probably make it a great TV show, but it was a terrible read. So I definitely don't recommend reading this, but when the show comes out on Netflix, it will probably be good.
And didn't you say that one is illustrated, but it doesn't match?
Yeah. So that was my original problem, and I actually switched to audio as a result, because these are what the illustrations look like.
Okay.
If you guys can see that.
Yeah.
And the character is described as being blonde, fair, and doll-like.
Okay.
But to me, this does not look like a doll-like person.
That's different.
She also doesn't look, so she has that, like, the illustrations were, I was so frustrated with this book. I don't know why I gave it 2 stars. It deserved less. I was feeling generous. So yeah, the plot is very interesting. It's about like, what if a girl is given, like, she's the one that's in charge of like the sword from like King Arthur. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not Arthur, it's this girl. Yeah. Like, what if that's what happens? And that's how the story starts. And that sounds really interesting. Yeah. And it does sound like it would be a great television show. But for now, it was just a terrible book. However, I did end the month on a high note with We Hunt the Flame. Ooh. By this person whose name I did not look up how to pronounce. And I'm not going to try. But it is fantastic. So it takes place, it feels like a Middle Eastern fairy tale. And so there's just like all these characters that kind of come together. It has like this very slow burn romance, which if there's going to be romance in a book, that's how I would like it to be. I don't want people to fall in love in chapter 2 and then we pretend like that's normal life. But this was, I was surprised by it. I was surprised how good it was, I guess, is what I should say.
Yay.
So 5 stars, highly recommend. Go Go read it. So I had a very prolific month of reading, which I'm surprised because December tends to be a month when I'm doing lots of other things.
Yeah.
So it's probably why I haven't wrapped any gifts yet, but that's how that goes. So, Shauna, what have you read this month?
Okay, well, my list isn't as long as yours, but
Yeah, but
I'm
you have presents that are wrapped,
shopping.
right?
Yeah, I do. I have presents for 4 kids
Yeah.
and lots of baking and Christmas crafts. And so all that got in the way of my reading life.
Rude.
So rude. So the first book that I'll talk about is Charlotte's Web. And I mean, this is Evie White. I feel like everybody's read it, but the reason I listened to it again is because a new version of it just came out on Audible in October, I believe it was. And it's a full cast. I want to
Oh, I
say
love that.
they cast like, I can't remember if it's 20 or 50 people just for the noises of the animals. And like it's a ton of people in this cast, but it's got Meryl Streep. Like you're listening to Meryl
Oh,
Streep and it's just fantastic. She's the narrator and it's amazing. It's like a whole experience. So I would really suggest if you're a fan of Charlotte's Web who is not,
right.
um, get it, listen to it by yourself with your kids, whatever. It is phenomenal. So that was obviously 5 stars. And I was so excited. I couldn't even believe that I didn't hear about it before. I was like, but as soon as I did, I went and I got it. I didn't even have any credits. I didn't care. I just paid for it. And I was very, very happy. And my kids love it. So yay, started that month out good. Um, and then I went to a completely different avenue with a Neil Gaiman book.
Oh,
And I know it's called Neverwhere. Have you read that?
I haven't, but it's on my TBR.
Okay.
What'd you
So
think?
I liked it. It was really creepy and dark and a little scary, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it's about this man who he's actually on a date going to a restaurant with his girlfriend. I believe they're about to be engaged. This happens very early, so it's not a spoiler. And he sees this woman bleeding on the ground in London. And he's like, we have to help her. And of course, his date's like, we have to get to the restaurant. And I'm like, really?
Wow.
So he helps this woman, and as he's helping her, these men come to his apartment because he takes her there because she's like, I don't want to go to a hospital. I just take me somewhere, safe. And he's like, all right, you can come to my apartment. And I'm like, that's kind of a bad idea nowadays. Like this could have been potentially a terrible situation.
Right.
But these guys come to the apartment and they're like, where is this girl? And they're super creepy. And he's like, I don't know who you're talking about. And so anyway, it turns out that there's these two different worlds. And he finds himself in Neverwhere, which is kind of like a labyrinth world underneath London. And it's full of like
Ooh.
darkness and monsters and murderers and all of this scary stuff. And he eventually finds himself there. And so he has to work with this girl called Dor. She's a noble woman. And he has to help her, um, like, save her city. Otherwise, he can't go back to his normal London. And,
Wow.
it could mean risking his life to do so. But it's very creepy how there's these two separate worlds and they're kind of linked together. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
It sounds really good. I'm
Yeah.
like, I need to move that up on my TBR.
Yeah, it was really creepy and like, but even though it's creepy, he still has humor in it. And so there's parts where I laugh and then there's parts where I'm like, did something just move outside? Or like
What's happening? What was that noise?
exactly. So the next one I have, you're going to laugh, is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Love it.
This kind of came out of nowhere, but what happened was I was talking to my friend about Harry Potter, and then it just kind of got like under my skin. I'm like, I gotta read it again, even though we're planning to actually read it again next year for 2020, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, this first one especially is so short that
Right.
you just breeze through it. But why I wanted to read it again is because there's another podcast that I listen to called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. Okay, so each chapter is titled by, so for instance, the first chapter, which is called The Boy Who Lived, on their podcast, they title it Commitment. So you read the chapter on your own, and then you listen to the podcast, and they talk for about half an hour on how the word commitment would apply to that chapter. So it's basically you're almost doing like a really in-depth study in the book, almost like
I love that idea.
Like a Bible study into Harry Potter. And so we look at commitment from all angles. And the funniest thing was that it really made me look at the Dursleys different, because they were talking about the commitment of Mr. Dursley, because they said even the part where he finds out that Harry, like they're talking about Harry and everything, he knows his wife wants nothing to do with that it gives her severe anxiety to even think about this. And so when he approaches her knowing that people are talking about Harry, like even to hear the name Harry throws her into, anxiety. So he doesn't approach her and say, you know what, everybody's talking about Harry Potter. He approaches her and says, have you heard from your sister-in-law? Or, have you heard from your sister? Right, sister, right? Not sister-in-law.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, sister. So he says, have you heard from your sister? And so he leads it that way. And she's like, no, why haven't I done that? And so they're talking about, they're like, you can see his commitment to his wife because he doesn't want to upset her. And just that little bit gave me a little bit of compassion for Mr. Dursley. And then they also said, think about his commitment to his work, because it describes him in his office as facing away from the window so that he can't see everything going on outside. So he's showing commitment to his work by not wanting to be distracted by things. And I'm like, oh, this is so strange, because when I first read through it, I was like, oh, I don't like the Dursleys. I don't like anything about them. But you know what? They are committed. And again, they just go through this, like they are committed to their normal life. They just want their normal life. And so then they go into the commitment of Dumbledore and Hagrid, because they both appear in chapter 1 towards the end and everything. And so at the end of that podcast, I'm like thinking about everything in so many different ways. And so like chapter 2 is The Vanishing Glass. Mm-hmm. And they label that one loneliness. And then it goes on, they go into like the next chapters, they talk about fear, generosity, expectations, vulnerability, promises, betrayal. So if you like Harry Potter and you want to reread it and you want to go a little bit more in depth and look at things in a different way, I highly recommend doing this. They go through all the books and every chapter this way. And
this is awesome.
It's so cool. It's so cool. So that's called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text.
Love it.
And since I actually read the book faster than I listened to the podcast, I would like to actually read a chapter and listen, and read a chapter and listen. That's probably what I might do for the next time, because it was just so fun. Let's see. The next one I have, this was my book of the month pick for my book of the month box. It's called The Wives by Taryn Fisher. It says, how far would you go to find the truth about your husband? And this one, I was, I don't know, I had other books that I wanted to like finish or be in the middle of, but I was like, oh, I just got this. I'm just going to grab it. I don't know anything about it. I'm just going to read it. And I don't know if you saw my Goodreads, like halfway through, I'm like, this book is amazing. I'm like, this is so good. So it starts out with this woman who's married to this man, and she knows that he has 2 other wives. He is her husband legally, but he has the 2 other wives, like they're not legally married, but it's kind of like a plural marriage thing, but that she has agreed to. But she's not allowed to ever meet them or talk about them or know their names or know anything about them. She just knows that on Thursdays, he's with her. And Monday, he's with Monday. He calls her Monday, or she calls her Monday. And Tuesday, he's with Tuesday, you know, and all this stuff. So all she gets to know is that on Thursday, he is with her. And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, that's not something I would agree to.
So
like,
my first question is, what about the other days of the week? But go
right?
ahead.
Where are you on those days?
Yeah, you're just by yourself? Like, that sounds unfair.
Yeah. And so finally she starts to get a little bit like, I want to know more about these other wives. They've been married maybe 2 years or something. And so she finds them, or she finds a receipt with one of the girls' names on it and finds her on Facebook and kind of stalks her a little bit and goes to her house and meets her under the pretense of just running into somebody and, oh, do you want to go have coffee? And like, and so she's talking to this girl and then she finds the other one. And then her husband, I don't want to give too much away, her husband finds out about her trying to find out about these other wives and kind of goes a little bit crazy. And so then right at this point, I'm like, this is getting so good. I'm like, what is going on? And then it went downhill so fast, like a blazing flame of terribleness. And I was so mad because I hate feeling tricked in a book.
Right.
And I hate feeling that I've been lied to in a book. I mean, I know that sounds weird, but it's like you made this story and then at the end just to say like, just kidding. Or, you know, like,
right.
It's all just a lie or, you know, whatever it is. I don't want to say exactly what happens for people who might be reading this or are going to read it. But I was so incredibly disappointed. And if you do want to know everything that I thought about, go to my Goodreads and there's spoilers. You can read about it. I was so angry. I finished it. It could have been so much better. Oh, it could have been such a great book. And I think that's
so
what was
disappointing.
Yes. I mean, it had the potential to really be amazing. And I really thought it was going to be my pick of the month. Hands down. I was so excited, but no.
Sadness.
Yeah, I was so upset. Okay, the next one, I have two more. The next one is called The Girl Who Came Home. That's by Hazel Gaynor. And that's actually one that I listened to. And it is about a group of people who are on the Titanic. And we all know what happens to the Titanic. And so you're getting kind of a multi-generational story. So the woman who was 17 when she went on the Titanic with a bunch of her friends and family from Ireland, she's going through the events that happened through her journals and everything. And then you're also hearing a more modern story from the grandchild of that woman who is trying to get her grandmother to talk about this story because her grandmother never wanted to talk about it. And so finally now she's talking about it and the granddaughter is writing a story about her. And so it's really, it's so heart-wrenching because you know what happens. And when she's talking about some of the people that didn't make the boat because they had a fever or they had a rash, and so they were turned away and said, you can go on this, next boat that's leaving tomorrow. Like in her journal, she's saying, I feel so bad for these people. They're not going to be able to get on this boat. This is a momentous time in history. And you're like, no, those people are the lucky ones, they're not going to be on this boat, And I thought it was really, it gave me kind of shivers when she told her granddaughter, she said, I was even writing in my journal when we actually struck the iceberg and you can see the jolt in my handwriting. And so the granddaughter was looking at her journal and she could see that, she was in the midst of writing a sentence.
Chills.
Yeah. And even though this is a fictionalized book, right. I mean, there was 1,800 people on that ship. Somebody had to have been, This could have been somebody's story. So anyway, it's just about her and how she's kind of overcome that. And it's good. It's really, really good. And I've never read a Titanic story. So this is my...
I don't think I have either.
This is my first. Yeah.
Nice.
So sad. Okay. So my final book is called All Have Sinned. And this is by Marcus Buckley. And I am so excited to just kind of talk about this book because Marcus Buckley is actually my pastor at my church. So this book is a little bit personal to me because I know the author. And I think anytime you know the author, you feel like really giddy to share the book and like, you want people to read it and try it. The book, I believe, is available on January 11th, but you can pre-order on Kindle and you can now pre-order the hardback copy on Amazon. So I'm actually only about halfway through. I know we like to talk about books that we've read, but I just really wanted to talk about this one really quick. And this is, okay, so first of all, this is not a book that I would normally read because it's very CIA, FBI, investigation, terrorism type book. And I'm thinking that's more along the lines of like, would that be like James Patterson?
Yeah.
Type book.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was, I was wondering how I would feel reading this type of book, but I actually am really enjoying it because it's centered around Thomas Hawkins, he was actually a seminary student. And he was going through seminary school. He's going to be a preacher. And then he's recruited by the FBI. And they come in and they say, we think that you would be perfect for the FBI. And he's like, what do I do? Do I stay on my path with seminary or do I go a completely different way and join the FBI? I mean, that's two totally different paths.
Right.
So he joins the FBI and he becomes this amazing investigator with the FBI. This really tragic terrorism account happens and this convention center explodes. And so they're investigating that. And it's just all about how he kind of is investigating that and they think that there's going to be some other terrorist attacks, but it's really fast paced. But I'm really excited to finish it. And not only that, but we will be interviewing Pastor Marcus for our January episode. So I can't wait for you guys to hear that. Please tune in. That's going to be on January 7th's episode. And that'll be right before the book premieres. So that'll be fun. And I think you guys will really, really like his story and why he is writing this particular book. It is very, it kind of parallels a little bit of his life, which is very fascinating. So please tune in for that. And so those are the books that I've gone through for December. Liz, what were your pick and skips of your month?
All right. So, that's a good question. I had 3 5-star books. I had 4 5-star books. But honestly, it has to be this one.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so
The
good.
Starless Sea.
So, The Starless Sea is definitely my pick of the month. It was just so beautifully written and the plot's pretty complex, which I think it makes it a really fun read. So that one's definitely my pick of the month. I feel like pick of the month is always easier than skip of the month. Mm-hmm. But you know what? Honestly, even though I DNF'd 2 books this month, my skip is this. Because this is just a trick. This isn't a book. This is a multimedia project. Yeah. And and maybe that wasn't the author's intent. Maybe they sat down genuinely and they're like, we really want to write a book. But it doesn't read that way. And the articles I read don't seem to.
Who is the author of that?
The author is Thomas Wheeler.
Okay.
and it's illustrated by Frank Miller. And I believe Frank Miller does like graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if Thomas Wheeler has written anything else, because I mean, according to my research, he writes screenplays.
Yeah.
That's what he does. That's his job. And I'm sure he's very good at it because, like I said, it reads like what I think would be an interesting television program. So I do look forward to the television program, but that was my skip of the month. What are your pick and skips?
Okay, so my pick, I feel like my skip is way easy. Let's just do my skip first.
All right.
My skip is The Wives. Like, easily. Easily. I'm
Which
so
is so
angry.
because, like, as you're describing the beginning, I'm like, this sounds like I want to read this.
I know.
And then,
I was like,
and
this is so
I read your
tumultuous.
review on Goodreads.
Yeah.
So
I was so mad. I hate feeling tricked. I just makes me angry. My pick of the month. Let's see. So, looking at all of my books, I feel like on a personal level, of course, I would pick All Have Sinned by my pastor. But I'm not finished with that book, so we'll just wait on that. I'm going to pick... Oh, goodness. I'm going to pick Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
I love it.
Because, because it's Harry Potter, but also because I paralleled it with that podcast that just made me look at it so differently and so much more intense.
I love the idea of that podcast.
Yeah, and you know what I was thinking of doing is I haven't read it to my kids yet because I want to get the illustrated copies like you have. And I think what I'll do is I'll read them a chapter and then we'll listen to the podcast together so that they can kind of learn how to pick those extra things out of a book. Like, I won't make it like, oh, now we're going to be educational.
Right.
Listen to you have to write an essay, you know? But like, even just listening to something and kind of driving those points home and those characters and learning a little bit more about it, I think will just help them because
Nice.
I'm obsessed with it.
All right. Well, I think we both had really fun months reading.
Yes.
This for December. And I am super excited for our next podcast because we are going to be talking about how things went this year with our reading goals and the reading goals that we're setting for 2020. Oh,
wow.
And yeah, I know. I'm like, that's like a whole new decade. So we're excited to have you guys join us for that. That will be coming out next week. And we want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas.
Yes, because it's Christmas Eve right now.
It is.
Oh my goodness.
So we hope you get all of the books that you had on your list and you guys can start 2020 off with us super with all brand new fun reads. Please comment, like, and subscribe. We love to see your comments. You can also chat with us on Instagram and Facebook. We're over there, and we're always posting fun things, and you can stay caught up with what we're reading, and we love to see what you're reading as well. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next week and after the new year. Have a great Christmas. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Merry Christmas.